So turning to the precepts for this meeting, the first precept in the traditional framing, I'm using the precepts as presented by Chan Master Bodhidharma. He's credited with bringing the practice of Buddhism from India to China. The Buddhism was already there in the form of scriptures and in writings, but it was more of a scholarly undertaking at that point, comparing and contrasting it to Confucianism and Taoism. So the traditional precept from Bodhidharma is the absolute is subtle and mysterious. In the realm of the pure unconditioned, not subverting a single word is called the precept of not lying. And the way that I framed it, the absolute is subtle and mysterious in the realm of the pure unconditioned. Speaking sincerely is called the precept of truth. So to me, this is really about speaking in a way that's responsible. Traditionally, right speech in Theravada Buddhism will talk about avoiding things like gossip or idle speech. And idle speech is viewed as speech that isn't actually connecting, it isn't actually wholesome, you're not really wanting to connect to the other. It's sort of that mindless chatter that humans can have. And gossip is speaking about others to about someone who's not there. So to me, there is a sincerity in truth, most definitely. But it's also I'm sorry, I lost my place here. Yeah, speaking sincerely, the precept of truth. Because to me, the truth, we really have a lot of layers to that. We can have conditioned truth or relative truth. So within the ordinary workings of our daily life, what's that truth? And then we also have unconditioned or absolute truth. We have truth that doesn't change. And when the absolute, the unconditioned come into manifest form, come into the conditioned world, then nuance is introduced. And there's a lot of positionality we take as people. And from that positionality, from my understanding, from my upbringing, having a certain viewpoint, my age and all these different factors, there's a particular viewpoint. And recognizing that we hold that as truth, that would be a relative truth, where the absolute truth would be more the true words of the absolute. There'd be words that would be unifying, would not be divisive, would be inclusive and connecting, would be looking for the wholesomeness, the oneness, the unity in the speech itself. So trying to bring together rather than to highlight the distinctions, differences that we have from each other. I think when we're talking about speech and truth, this also brings us back to one of the, or several of the pure precepts, which are cease from evil, do good, and do good for others. And this really is that cease from evil. It's that being committed to turning away from just using speech that's going to be beneficial to me personally, but it's at the expense of someone else, or it's not a speech that's inclusive. I'm not maintaining the wholeness. I'm trying to divide it and gain an advancement in my speech. And the evil, as I mentioned before, to me isn't like a movie evil. This is the intentional self-centeredness. I know it's going to harm you, but I do it anyway because it benefits me. So it's that intentional action of division with another. Also, the other pure precept, do good for others, for all beings. That again is an inclusive, it's a unifying precept. It's how do we make a oneness? There's a famous koan called Nansen's Cat, and the koan goes that there was a large monastery that had two wings, an east and a west wing. And they had a house cat that was in the monastery that would go between these different the different wings. And at one point, some of the monastics in each wing began arguing and fighting over whose cat it was, where it belonged. And the teacher came along, and the story of the koan is that he held up the cat and he said, if any of you can speak one word, which would be one word of truth, then I'll spare the cat. And if you can't, then I'm going to cut the cat in two. You'll each have one half of this cat. And again, the koan story is no one could say a word, so he cut the cat in half. Some of the modern translators have said that in the commentary on the koan that Nansen did not in fact cut this cat in two. He did a sort of figuratively cut it in half, and really brought to the point that they were using divisive speech. They were separating, they were looking for something that was beneficial to them at another's expense. And to me, when I worked this koan with Sando Roshi, one of the discussions we had was about love in relation to this cat. Because it's like if one of these monastics, in my mind, really loved this cat, I mean truly loved the cat, and wanted the best for the cat, one of the things they might have said was, you take the cat's yours. And by their demonstrating the love that I'm willing to surrender the physicality of the cat to protect its life, to protect its wholeness, and to have it still be beneficial in this monastery. So the koan's about cutting the cat in one. How do we create a oneness with our speech when there's division? One of the ways that we can cultivate this is by trying to speak from our heart. And this can include speaking from our heartfelt emotions, from what's important to us, but it's also speaking with the one heart, the undivided heart, the heart that's always connected to other beings. Finding language and finding ways to speak from this heart, and we're also trying to speak to the heart of the other. So to the extent we can do that or hold that, that really helps us with this precept. And another component here, which I think is important, is really to be clear. What do we know about the truth in this statement or this conversation? Do we know enough to identify what's the truth? And it's really taking the time to investigate, to understand, to have some sense of what's going to be divisive to the other. We certainly can't know completely, but we can have that intention. So this is really part of that truthfulness. And when we fall short of this is where it falls into the falseness, into the lying. When we're not paying attention, we don't care how it lands with others. We don't care who's hurt by our speech as long as we get what we want. That's the evil that we're trying to cease from. Trying to find, again, the undividedness, speaking from the one heart. From my heart to your heart, there's no difference. It's all the same heart. And then trying to find words that are true. And this doesn't mean also that we don't have hard conversations, that we don't say things that others may not want to hear, because that may be the truth too. That's one of the functions I have as a teacher. There's times when I have to tell people truth that they don't want to hear, particularly if they feel they've had some big experience and they'd like to get it validated. If I'm telling them, no, I'm not seeing, I'm not feeling that. I think something important happened, but I don't believe it was that. That's hard to hear. But it also is good for them to hear because it is the truth. It lets them land there, and also they understand that there's an integrity with the speech. And then if the experience does happen, I can confirm it, they know it's true, at least from this perspective. So it engenders truth, it engenders relationship. It's important that we not overly focus on perfection. We're human in human form. We do our best working with others. We do our best to represent ourselves. A number of you communicated today that you were either tired, not feeling well, struggling in some way. When we're in those places, we're not going to be as crisp and clear with our speech. So some of this is recognizing our own limitations, living from our own truth as it is, or being someplace in a different culture. I mean, I've done that before in traveling. I try to watch the culture and see what the norms are, but sometimes I bring my Americanisms, my expectation, to the other culture. I was telling some people recently when I was in London, at a lot of the corners, they have written in paint on the street, look left. And I said to one of my friends who lives there, who's that for? And he said, Americans, that we and I guess others who also drive as we do, because the Americans look in our direction, that we expect traffic to come in, not in the other direction. So it's training ourselves to look beyond what our assumption is, what the usual is. In a lot of countries, people assume that how they do things is the right way. This is the best way, the right way to do it. And it's just a common way. I've told this story before on retreat that there was once a family, and mother was preparing a ham for a family dinner. And her young daughter watched mom cut the end of the ham off and throw it away. And the daughter says to the mom, well, how come you do that? And the daughter said, oh, it's family tradition. We've always done it this way. She said, in fact, my mother, your grandmother's here. Why don't you ask her about the history? So the granddaughter goes out to the grandmother. Well, Grandma, I saw Mom just cut the end off this ham and throw it away. And she said, this is family tradition. I'm just wanting to know more about it. And the grandmother, chuckling, said, well, when your mother was young, your grandfather and I weren't very rich. We were quite poor. And we had only one small baking dish. And the hams only came in one size, and it was too big for our dish. So I had to cut the ham off to fit it in the dish. So you can see here was a necessity that this woman had to do in terms of cooking. Her daughter saw it and made almost a ritual out of it and viewed it as a family tradition. And this is what we do. We see repeated behavior and we elevate it to something special. Then it becomes sacred. It's hard to change. So part of this process of looking at speech and truth is looking at what are your assumptions? What biases do you come from? And it's not using biases as a dirty word. It's just saying we all had our birth families, our life experience that shaped our viewpoint. What about our viewpoint do we take for granted? Do we not see that it might be different for someone else? And then finally, what I want to say in speaking about truth is that mistakes are going to be made. We're going to be unskillful. We're going to do it wrong. We're going to say it wrong. But if we try to communicate with our heart, with an openness, with a vulnerability to connect with the other, our mistakes are going to land more softly. Our intention will probably be known, or mostly known. So people know we're not being malicious, we're not trying to be divisive or harmful. We just made a misstep. And also that's where the humility comes in, to recognize when we make a misstep and to own it. That's the atonement of, yes, I misstepped, I misspoke, I didn't think about this or that, I hurt this person with my speech.